What is it like to fall in love? I don't know, so instead I spent my time curating a collection of romance manga to fill the gaping hole in my heart. However, through this journey, I found myself trapped in a forever perpetuating state of reading absolute fucking dogshit. 30 chapter manga, repeatable dialogue and events built upon hundreds and hundreds of already existing tropes. And through this trudge of dumpster diving romance manga, 6 in particular stood out to me. Not because they were any good, but because of what each poorly written story revealed about who I was through my endless consumption. So join me and let's talk about some terrible romance manga I can't stop reading. I was cheated on by my girlfriend, but my Devilish junior now yearns for me follows a university student named Yuta. A month after his breakup, he encounters a first-year student named Shinomiya, who coincidentally is also being cheated on by her boyfriend. After a conveniently placed Christmas dinner and a mixer where Yuta displays average human compassion that he gets glazed for, Shinomiya becomes infatuated with him and ends up spawn camping his apartment for the rest of the series. It's not terrible in the way that it's unreadable or offensively bad, but it's an example of what I think is a structurally empty story. The art is beautiful, and it's actually not about high schoolers for once, but it reads like a never-ending progression of Yuta fighting the urge to not fall in love with his classmates. He's still recuperating from his breakup, using it as an excuse to not pursue his junior, viewing his girl best friend as a platonic relationship, and to only add more fuel to the fire, his ex-girlfriend reaches out to him and says that she didn't actually cheat on him. What? The manga is great at controlling what I like to call the honeymoon phase of romance, and it does this by utilizing what researchers call the Labov's high point analysis. In 1984, some psychologists studied what made a story good. Doing some scientific research stuff, they found a framework called Labov's high point, where a good story builds towards a high point, suspending the action after reaching it for dramatic emphasis, and then finally resolving it. These romance manga fall under the bad category of Labov's theory by repeatedly introducing ending at the high point narratives and stretching it across a ton of chapters. We get a high point fulfillment from a cute or suggestive moment, only for the manga to then suspend the displayed action by delaying the act of actually engaging in a relationship. Just think back to the last talking stage you had where everything felt perfect, surreal, envisioning a future with this wonderistic partner, and then you got ghosted. These manga are written like an eternal talking stage, feeding off the feelings that come from that honeymoon phase of love. For example, in chapter 22, Yuta and Ayaka go on a classic hot springs trip alone, but just as friends. Towards the very end of the arc, Ayaka leaps onto him and asks, "Did you ever fall for me?" Ayaka, whose yukata is slipping, and Yuta, who's desperately trying not to look, chooses to preserve their current relationship, claiming that she's important to him as a friend. Afterwards, she says it was a test based on her own guilt towards believing his ex-girlfriend cheated on him because of her existence, which is like fine, except this moment does absolutely fuck nothing for the rest of the series. An emotional peak that gets completely factory reset 5 chapters later when Ayaka gets jealous and possessive over Yuta in front of his junior. By having every moment in the series be non-consequential and removing the stakes, all you're left with is the individual fictitious joys rooted from the potential relationships Yuta has with every girl. What the style of writing and these particular series focus on is that sense of security and reliability. They knowingly support the reader through various character tropes and settings that feel familiar, fabricating the perfect talking stage for the viewer to enjoy without compromising the risks that come with genuine relationships. And no series does this better than Instead of Yuta, we now have Yuya, a first-year high school student whose parents fled the country, leaving him 36 million yen in debt. He was going to be forced to slave away, paying off his debt, but before he gets taken away by the Yakuza, Hitotsuba Kaede is the prettiest high school girl in Japan, and also the niece of the National Police Agency's Chief of Investigations. She barges into Yuya's home with her lawyer mother and pays off his debt, allowing him to live a regular high school life. But as part of the contract to have his debt be paid off, Yuya now belongs to Kaede. Of her own selfish request for falling in love with him, she begged her parents to live with him alone, and after he graduates high school, he will be adopted into the Hitotsuba household, marrying her and forbidden from ever seeing his parents again. This setup, and the whole premise for the beginning of a romance story, is just butt booty garbage. It's a standard pretty girl mediocre guy setup, except the only reason Kaede decided to help Yuya was because, oh, look at him kicking that football in the rain so desperately. He's attacking that ball with such passion, such aggression. I'm so in love. I'm all for people falling in love at first sight. I don't think it's a bad premise to have, but this is just executed so poorly. In no reasonable mind does anybody decide to pay off 36 million yen and force a man who you know nothing about besides his ability to kick a football into a relationship where he doesn't even have a chance to rebuttal. She can't even describe anything notable about him as a person for reasons that she likes him. She explains him as dedicated, working hard, has an iron will, occasional casual kindness, and a wonderful personality. That's literally anybody ever. It's the blank main character and unyielding love the female lead has for that cutout that make these series appealing to so many readers like myself. Every other character in this story is just a flimsy trope. This girl's a tomboy that is secretly in love, this guy's a jock, this guy's a nerd, this guy's the popular best friend of the main character. The manga is painfully good at not going any deeper than the very front door of its people, because if they ever did, it'd completely break the immersion experience. In a series like Nana, every decision that Hachi and the people around her make have actual consequences following those choices, and we as the reader have to bear through every horrendous action made. It's a painful read full of moments that made me want to shatter all the glassware in my kitchen, but it's those harsh moments that make the series full of life and what makes each character individualized in what they choose to do, whether it be the right or just awful life-changing mistake of a choice. Their actions directly influence the story's direction, and their choices are guided by what they believe in at that moment. In contrast, no matter what Yuya does or whatever interactions he has with any characters, it's all meaningless. There's security in the relationship that will most definitely follow him in later chapters, replacing the frustration of Nana and forming what is known as a safe romance manga. Hodaka Nanamura has gone through high school life without experiencing the joyful youth that typically accompanies it. He's a complete loner who can't hold a conversation and believes himself to be ill-suited for relationships. On his way home from graduation, he encounters Hana Mitsuji, one of the prettiest girls in his class, crossing the street absent-mindedly. As Nanamura opens his eyes, he wakes up completely fine and finds out he's traveled back in time to his first year in high school. He had originally died saving Hana from the incident, and in regret she prayed to the gods to bring Nanamura back, sending them both back in time. With a second chance at a high school life, Hana proposes a partnership with Nanamura, wanting to repay her savior and fix his high school life by making sure he forms proper relationships this time around. Though this manga isn't amazing, I actually found a lot of it enjoyable and sadly relatable, especially with its increasing similarities towards my teen romantic comedy, Oregaru. It takes the antisocial pessimistic protagonist of Hikigaya, making it levels far worse with a trash comedy vibe instead of the actual genuinity. But just like its anime comparison, it tries to focus on this idea of a self-isolating and deprecating person and how their inability to care for themselves not only causes harm to their own social being, but their relationships as well. In chapter 7, one of Nanamura's classmates brings a rom-com light novel to school and gets caught by her friends. As they start teasing her about it, and before she can admit it's hers, Nanamura jumps in and fabricates the idea that he snuck the light novel into her bag like a weirdo. He saves her social life by pretending the light novel was his and simultaneously worsened his own social positioning, now labeled as a pervert, stalker, and creep. During the school trip, everyone ostracizes him because of this. Some people who know the truth behind the incident still try to include him, much to the disdain of the rest of the class, which results in Nanamura refusing their invite, insisting that his method is right because lone wolves tend to be alone anyways. This whole situation reads a lot like a few scenes in Oregaru, with Nanamura attempting to maintain the status quo, while his stubbornness towards being alone hurts those who are trying to help him. However, the biggest problem in this comparison is that Nanamura's situation solely stems from his obstinance to continue being a lone wolf. In Oregaru's second season, where Hikigaya takes on the request of Rad Dude's confession to not go down in failure, there's way more depth regarding his actions besides his own low self-esteem choice and actions. In a similar manner, his stunt damages both his relationships with those close to him and himself, but it exposes so much more about the characters around him as well. Hikigaya's dislike towards superficiality turns into hypocrisy with his actions of protecting that exact fakeness he hates. It's one of the major turning points in the series, straining the trio's relationship and reflecting the shallowness that will eventually overcome their group. The lone wolf perception and how the female interests try to comfort Nanamura all feel fluffy in comparison because there just isn't as much of a connection between them besides the fact that he's alone and they pity him. While I do think the series has an interesting relationship with the main lead and her desire to save Nanamura's high school life, it reads like a poor man's version of Oregaru, and that's a big reason why I like it. It feels like a cheaper Oregaru, but it's Oregaru without any of the genuine painful moments or bad feelings associated with it. It's a lighthearted version of one of the greatest rom-coms ever made, and it does a great job at being absolute comedy donkers, while still managing to have slightly elevated moments that are outstanding for a manga of its level. And though I love this series for what it does with its shiny exterior that holds nothing of importance inside, it's still within the confines of the indefinite honeymoon phase. But what would happen if a terrible romance manga actually tried to finish? Third-year high school student Ishizuki Riku is best friends with Minase and Takuto, classmates he's known since elementary school and who have recently started dating as of last year. In their final year of high school, the three aim to enjoy their time as friends, keeping things the same as they've always been, except for the fact that Riku is desperately in love with his best friend's girlfriend, and she reciprocates this by constantly trying to sleep with him. Riku has to control himself towards Minase's advances, slowly letting his grip slip on if he should maintain the current relationships he has or choose to ruin it all. But someone's girlfriend actually tries to move the story forward, weaving in mysteries with its premise, foreshadowing that could lead everything to fall apart, and drawing towards a real conclusion, which is also where it fails. Someone's Girlfriend does a great job balancing the level of suspension it creates, specifically around proximity without collapse. The story lives entirely in that in-between space of sustained moral tension. The relationship never fully happens, but it constantly feels like it might, existing in a similar honeymoon phase as the previous stories, except just more erotic. The hook of the story isn't the love that grows like it should in romance stories, but rather the erosion of self-control in each and every character. Take Umimi, Riku's junior, who dated Takuto because she was obsessed with Riku and wanted to be closer to him. She frames it like a warped little sister fantasy, attaching herself towards his best friend just to orbit him, but instead of the story dissecting how unhealthy and fucking weird that is, it just pushes it even more. After Riku protects Umimi from her abusive stepfather and lets her stay the night, he wakes up to her whispering his name while using his own hand to get off under the assumption that he's still sleeping. It introduces these scenarios that get increasingly freakier, bordering on this absurd taboo concept of cheating, and in doing so, it falls apart in finding a reason to explain the character's actions. In the manga's ending, Riku and Minase's relationship is thwarted in a way that doesn't provide any sort of real closure to the story or their relationship at all. It gives us a closing chapter that revolves solely around Riku and Minase boning it out, while simultaneously backburning the side love interests, only to bring them back with no consequences towards the actions they took. Furthermore, the excuse towards Minase and Takuto's relationship, while logically kind of makes sense, just isn't well thought out at all, and only results in Takuto being expelled from the story in its closing chapters. The moment the manga left its suspended state of temptation, secrecy, and possibility, the illusion of real romantic tension breaks. The honeymoon phase ends, and suddenly the story has to deal with consequences it was never made to handle. In 2010, an anime titled My Little Sister Can't Be This Cute released, and though it didn't create the cis-con relationship, it did increase the marketability and overall subgenre idea of it in anime, which would eventually lead to the release of Domestic Girlfriend and the subgenre within another subgenre of stepsisters. This existing pipeline of events has led me to one of the weirdest types of terrible romance manga in what I like to call they use a little stepsister as a convenient plot point device to foster a relationship where two individuals have to live together, which annoyingly forces them into close proximity and fosters a relationship, or the stepsister genre. She Was Actually My Stepsister is a manga about Ryota and his new sibling Akira, who he initially believes to be his brother after their parents remarry. The story isn't inherently bad just because of its plot circling around the idea of a taboo relationship and how the people involved should act, but rather it's a terrible romance manga because of the way it hits all the basic tropes and arcs that remove the individuality of a series like it. By using setups like the Romeo and Juliet play or the trip to the hot springs, the initial premise is just an excuse to drag you down the pits to the most generic and unplanned romantic story ever. But that's not the reason why I'm talking about this manga, because while it is bad, I just needed a reason to talk about little girls. The Emoto trope is best understood not through a sexual Freudian lens of repressed incestuous desire, but through the Nijigen Sanjigen framework that Galbraith in Otaku and the Struggles for Imagination in Japan develops. Nijigen, meaning two-dimensional, and Sanjigen, meaning three-dimensional, isn't about the inability to connect, but rather the different set of values around what intimacy and relationships mean. The little sister character is a Nijigen figure, fictional but real in a dimension where regular hegemonic masculinity's pressures are suspended, representing the opposite of everything demanding about the regular Japanese salaryman world. The Emoto trope makes no career, reproductive, or social performance demands. It's a relationship preloaded with affection entirely outside the economy of masculine competition and romance. When we look at Akira, we find all those factors within her character. She unconditionally loves the main character for befriending her and treating her like a normal human being, promising to love and eventually marry him. It's this appeal of the series that attracts so many readers to this genre and speaks back onto my initial entry about the honeymoon phase. A safe zone, protective area, and relationship that will never be destroyed due to the unique circumstances that birthed the connection. Combine this with Japan's cultural pressures around dating and social performance, the little sister character instead offers intimacy without the anxiety of courting an equal. There's no judgment nor fear of abandonment with a devoted loving character that looks up to you with unconditional affection. It's why this trope and subgenre are so appealing, but even outside of that, if you look at all the terrible romance manga talked about, they all hit similar feelings. All of them target this idea of promising the reader the idealized perspective, a perfect world where you can experience the promising love of someone who refuses to leave you alone. And there's no singular worse series, a better terrible romance manga than Yukito is a boy who has the worst luck with women. He has been betrayed, misled, and traumatized by every female he's ever interacted with, and now in high school he aims to be the average gloomy background character that doesn't exist. This manga is hilariously terrible, with art that genuinely made me take a second look because of how beautifully, majestically, and utterly blindingly brilliant the proportions were. It has too many love interests to count, multiple taboo relationships, a self-deprecating emo protagonist, the classic gradual escalation that centers around the honeymoon phase of romance, and on top of all that, it's just bad. So how does it masterfully use all these tactics to emotionally manipulate its naive reader, aka myself, into actually reading it? Yukito's trauma isn't some significant event that genuinely changed him, but instead just something the author wrote to have an entire lineup of women who exist solely to psychologically destroy him. His childhood friend rejects him, his basketball teammate talks behind his back, his teacher humiliates him, his sister betrays him, and even his own mother neglects him. In a broad sense, it appeals to every reader that's ever had any negative situation with a female at all. A horribly relatable story that doesn't even try to fabricate a good enough background to truly resonate with the reader. Take the moment that's supposed to be the emotional core of Yukito's trauma, his sister. When they were kids, Yukito got close to another girl, and his sister interpreted this as him abandoning her. So naturally, like any reasonable sibling conflict, she pushes him off the playground hard enough that he cracks his head open on the ground while telling him to disappear. She runs to get their mom in regret, comes back, and he's gone. 6 days pass before Yukito finally shows up in the hospital, and when he wakes up, the first thing he does is apologize. Not for anything he actually did, but for failing to disappear like she told him to. This leads him into a never-ending depression that lasts until high school, despite his sister's attempts to rekindle their relationship. Just like his sister, each and every accident that led him to grow this hatred for himself and desire to be rid of from the world stems from a miscommunication where it wasn't actually the love interest's intent to cause harm to Yukito. As a result, we get this dynamic between Yukito and every female in the series where he repeatedly puts himself down while they, on the contrary, act completely smitten with him, attempting to do over their past mistakes. Instead of one painful experience shaping his worldview, the story piles on increasingly ridiculous betrayals, trying to make him experience as much suffering as the average berserk LARPer, but the more the manga insists that Yukito has suffered, the harder it becomes to take any of it seriously. Especially when the series transitions its characters' feelings of regret and guilt into a romantic development towards Yukito that leads to progressively awkward sexual advances. Yukito's mom is a great example of this. She regrets not spending enough time with him, constantly promising to show up to school events only to disappoint him again and again. So when she finally decides to fix the relationship years later and rushes home determined to be a better parent, the story sets up what should be a pretty straightforward emotional moment. She runs up to Yukito, pulls him into a hug, and then kisses him. It's not some accidental awkward moments, nor is there any adoption or non-blood relation going on here, it's just straight Oedipus complex. This isn't a singular moment in the story either. His sister kisses him, his mom takes a bath with him, just stacking escalating uncomfortable scenarios on top of each other for shock value, or whatever weird fetishes the author has. These manga weren't specifically terrible because of how they're made, but more so the way in which I consumed it that enabled me to escape into a world where affection was easily sought after. By reading these manga that follow a familiar path, one in which I know I'm guaranteed to experience that honeymoon phase of love once more, I can forget about what's happening around me in actuality. But all I accomplished in doing this was delaying the growth that should follow in messy, inexperienced, and uncomfortable situations that accompany true romance, because it's only through the pain and stress that you experience firsthand in which you truly learn what it's like to love someone even more. So to answer the first question of this video, what is it like to fall in love? I still don't know, but regardless of this fact, thank you to the stories I've been reading for all the garbage cliches, tropes, and trashy main characters, because at the end of the day, I know I wouldn't be who I am without being able to read my favorite subgenre of terrible romance manga. Hi, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. There's only 6 manga in this video, but I had way more in mind, just couldn't really fit them in. If you, for some reason after watching this, feel like you want to read a bunch of really short and meaningless romance manga, there's a huge list on the screen right now, and I'll have the full list in the description if you want to read any of the manga at all. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, and have a good day.